guys all find that music as peppy as I do. I just like start dancing to it. And so I hope you all are getting energized for that as well, because I know we've already had so much great content with the opening keynotes, then your first round of breakout sessions. So I hope you are having as good of a time as I am. Don't forget, of course, to pop over to the exhibit hall to check out all of the amazing resources we have. There's lots of great learning opportunities over there. And the more you download, the higher up you're going to be on the leaderboard. And as a reminder, the top 50 are going to get a pretty cool swag pack. So you are not going to want to miss out on that. But while we get things kicked off today, I'm kind of wondering how you're feeling. So our first poll question is up right now, and we want to vibe check. How are you feeling? And while you are answering that poll, I do want to do a few quick reminders. If you're on Twitter, please share what you are learning alongside us using the hashtag NextGenGov. There's lots of resources on the console in this webinar, as well as the entire environment, so make sure you're checking those out. If you need the closed captioning feature, look for the icon on the bottom right-hand side of the media player. That's where my face is showing up right now. We hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but they can and do happen. If they do, look for that Q&A box, and my colleague Maddie will make sure to get your questions answered. And here's the thing, it's in that same portal where you can ask our experts questions, so don't you dare be shy. Put your questions in early and often. We also have the open chat available for you today. It's located on the group chat button, so if you're looking for that, by all means, let us know what you are thinking in there. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and you can interact, of course, with your fellow colleagues. And if you miss any tidbits, don't worry. We'll email you a link to the entire event tomorrow, which will be sent directly to your inbox, so you'll be able to watch all of the sessions again, as well as the resources. All right, let's see the results of the poll. And about 76% of you, so I'm going to say 3/4, if my math is correct here, are ready to go. And about 18% need some coffee. And I get it. I also need some coffee, or just a caffeine injection straight into my body. But we are going to infuse you with a whole bunch of energy in this lunch keynote. So hopefully that helps as well. Before I get the content started, though, I do also want to thank our summit sponsors for helping us put on this session today. WAPA, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Government White Papers, and Americans School of Public Affairs, as well as Code for America. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and this event wouldn't be possible without your support. But right now, we are going to get right into the keynote, because here's a really important concept. Trust goes both ways, and creating a culture of trust and respect, it's such an important topic right now, especially in the world that we're living in. So joining us to tackle that topic is Tiana Sanchez. She's the author of Undefeatable and the author of The Upside of Failure. So thank you so much, Tiana, for joining us. And with that, I will hand the floor over to you.
All right. Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I saw all the wonderful, delicious sounding food in the chat box. So it's still early for me over here, but I'm so glad that you're here. So I just want to welcome you. I also know by the time that I finish my opening, this statement, most of you will have already made a decision to trust me or not. In fact, it really takes about 7 seconds for you to make 11 assumptions about someone. So you've decided whether or not you're going to trust me to deliver a talk, to finish on time, to teach you something, and make sure that I give you a tool or something that you can walk away with. So you're trusting me with that. But just like you're trusting me or making a decision to trust me, I'm also making a decision to trust you. Trust that you will receive what I have to deliver and what I have to say, that you're going to trust to stay and not leave before I finish. And I'm trusting you to listen, to respond, and to learn. It's a pretty straightforward transaction, just like our objectives today. So what are our objectives? We're going to have 3 questions that we are going to cover in the time that we have together. So we're going to look at, what does a culture of trust look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? I'm going to ask you to describe that for me in the chat box. Next, we're going to talk about what happens when there's a breach in trust. There's a violation or a fracture of trust. And number 3, how can you contribute to a culture of trust? So I want to ask you right now to type in the chat box, in between taking a bite or a sip, what does a culture of trust look like? Now, I want you to tap into your senses. I want you to think about visually, what does it look like? What shape or image comes to mind when you think of trust? Right? So Adrian, so there's a, free to speak truthfully. We have, it is hard to trust, right? But it's safe. There's open communication. There's a culture of transparency. What does that look like and feel like? When you think of an illustration, does it look like, when I think of a shape, sometimes I think of trust as being more circular. Yes, someone said circle. Someone said a bridge. Love that. I see a lot of respect, communication, right? So when I think of trust, I too think of a circle. It's something that goes, it's not just in one direction, but it's cyclical, right? There's this relationship perhaps that we have, right? So I see a lot, open communication, absolutely. Now let me ask you, what color comes to mind when you think of trust? So I want you to think of your work environment. If I were to go to your workplace today, right now, what colors might I see? Now you might be working from home, but let's say I just plopped into you, landed in your workplace right now. What might I see on the walls? What color? Blue and white, green, right? Yellow. I see a lot of these blue and green and yellow. So we see bright, sunny colors, right? Because there's certain emotions that are evoked from certain colors, right? If you think that the Google colors was just random, it isn't. They understand that certain colors evoke certain emotions. So with that being said, when we think of what a culture of trust looks like, it also has a feeling. It has a sense of emotion that, again, it evokes from us when we walk into that space. So just to kind of get us going, I wanted to plant that seed of what culture looks like for you and for me. Now, I also want to share something with you because I believe this wholeheartedly. Trust is non-linear. Trust is not one-dimensional. Trust, in fact, is multifaceted and multi-dimensional. It is a noun, but it's also a verb. It's a result, and it's also an action. When we look at this picture on the screen, it's the work being done, and it's the worker. It's the person laying the foundation, putting that in place, and it's also the process of what it took to start that foundation. It also describes the type of worker, right? So we look at, is someone trustworthy, or they have trustworthiness, we might hear someone say. So it describes the kind of worker that we might see on this page. It can also be an adjective. So it can describe someone. So we might say, I have a colleague, or I have a trusted colleague, right? So it's giving a description to someone. So it's not one-dimensional, and it's not linear. You can have different degrees of trust, from low to high, and different types of trust, from transactional trust to relational trust. I believe, though, that to kind of set us going, before we get into 3 questions that we're going to answer, I want to dispel a couple of myths that you may have about trust. One of them is, I don't have any influence over trust or culture in my organization. That is a myth. Let me give you an example. When you show up to work, the way that you show up, the way that you reply to an email, the tone of that email, the word choice, the frequency of your emails, and even the response time, the length of the email, how you show up to meetings. I know everybody has meetings, probably after today's lesson or maybe sometime today you got a meeting you have to show up to. Your punctuality, whether you choose to have your camera on or your camera off, whether you're a silent participant in the meeting or an outspoken one. When you talk to your boss about a colleague or talk about a colleague to your boss, instead of addressing them directly, and when you have a set of values that you bring into the workplace, it directly influences these behaviors. Behaviors and beliefs shape your culture. So if you think that you don't have any influence over culture, you're wrong. You absolutely do, especially in every behavior and every belief that you bring in to that work environment. Myth number 2 says trust is earned. Now type in the chat box if you believe this to be true. If you say trust is earned, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to dispel this myth once and for all. How many of you have ever taken an Uber or Lyft ride? Type in and just say yes, or you can say I've ridden Uber or Lyft. If you've ever taken an Uber or Lyft ride, the first time you've taken, I see a lot of yes. Understand that I've taken many Uber rides, and I trusted, just like you, that Uber ride to do 2 things: to pick me up on time and to deliver me safely to my destination. Trust was not earned, but it was given willingly. I don't know that Uber driver. I trust the app. I trust the service. And therefore, I'm willingly giving my trust to this person. They haven't done anything to earn it. There's no proof. I haven't seen the proof, but I am trusting that they're going to deliver me to my destination safely and pick me up on time. I can even recall one time I took a ride with a reckless Uber driver, which narrowly avoided an accident in a busy intersection with me as a passenger. I literally clutched my pearls and thought I was about to get hit by another car. Now, I no longer trusted that person or that driver, because that would have been a relationship that I had, but I did still trust the Uber service, and that was a transaction. Trusting at first is easy because we have nothing to compare it against. We're not tainted by something that someone said or a broken or fractured trust, something that created a mistrust with us. We're not tainted by that. So trusting at first is easy because we want to believe that people are trustworthy and that people are good. But when trust is broken, fractured, violated, regaining trust becomes very difficult. So here's myth number 3. Trust is blind. The myth that trust doesn't see color, it doesn't see gender, that trust doesn't see someone's disability or different ability, that trust doesn't see your education or your degrees or your status or your credentials. Trust doesn't see your occupation or your age. That is a myth. Because when we think about it, the reality is trust is biased. It has favorites. We can trust the motives of someone who shares something that we have in common with. We call that an affinity bias. We also may trust someone, we trust their competence because maybe we think they're attractive. And believe it or not, that's called beauty bias. So trust is not blind. Or trust is not blind. Trust has a bias when it comes to who we see and who's in front of us. When we see doctors, when we see pilots, we might think in our mind that they should look a certain way, that they should have a certain credential, that they should come from a certain background. And in doing so, it increases our ability to trust them. And our bias that we have is absolutely related to the assumptions that we make. And it's these assumptions that shape our perceptions. We all make assumptions about people. We assume things, like you did with me in the first 7 seconds of my introduction. And those assumptions shape our perceptions. And those perceptions influence our behaviors and our ability to trust. So you have to confront your assumptions about others that are based and rooted in biases. You have to be open, you have to be honest, and you have to help contribute to a safe workplace. And it starts by asking questions. Now, you might be saying, Tiana, what kinds of questions should I be asking? And I'm glad you asked me. So when we think about how to challenge your assumptions, again, everybody makes assumptions about people, and those assumptions shape our perceptions. So in what ways have I demonstrated a lack of trust? Because we often think it's the other person's fault, that they fractured trust. But what have I done? What have I demonstrated that could have created or caused a mistrust or a lack of trust? The next question we want to ask ourselves is, who or what is influencing me? You have people in your ears all the time. There's things that you see in your workplace, maybe even online and social media. Who's in your ear? Who or what might be influencing your behaviors or the way that you think? You might even want to ask, was there a violation or breach of trust? And that is a big question, because in most cases, you may find that, yes, in fact, there was a breach in trust. And so you have to ask yourself, well, in which area of trust is there a breach? And so I'm going to share with you what that looks like on this screen. I know it's a little hard to see, so I'm going to read it out, and you can capture it and you can take notes. But there's different types of trust violations that may occur. Now, I work with Ken Blanchard companies, and they've developed this amazing program that identifies 4 elements of trust. So again, trust is nonlinear, it's multidimensional. So 4 elements of trust are ability. You can trust a person's competence. You can trust their believability. You can trust their care, that they care about you, and you can trust their dependability. So when we think about the bottom left, which is in the blue little square, and I'll read it off to you. Some of the violations of trust may look like this. It may be a lack of expertise. It may be someone was inconsistent with results. They may have been ineffective at problem solving or decision making and planning. That might have created a violation of the ability trust, of their competence. You no longer trust that individual's ability to get the job done. Or on the top left, it might be that a violation of trust has occurred because they've failed to admit a mistake. It's very hard for people, especially those in leadership roles, to acknowledge and admit when they've made a mistake. They lack credibility. Maybe they're acting on their own behalf. They lack value alignment, or they're unfair and unethical. That can create a violation of trust. You no longer believe or trust in their word. The promise is broken. Or if you look to the top right, you no longer trust them because they haven't demonstrated that they truly care about you. They haven't listened to you. They haven't expressed empathy. They fail to acknowledge and encourage you. And that is a violation of the connectedness trust or caring. Or maybe in the bottom right-hand corner, they didn't honor a commitment. They made an unrealistic promise. They didn't hold themselves and others accountable. Maybe they were too rigid and not flexible. And so it violated the trust in your ability to depend on them. So when these violations of trust occur, it makes it nearly impossible to foster a culture of trust. So how can you help that situation? How can you begin to contribute to building a culture of trust? So in the chat box, type it in. And I love seeing all the comments coming through. Yes, sometimes mistakes are swept under the rugs. This is challenging for all of us. Absolutely. Someone says 9 out of 10 of these are trust violations. So in the chat box, how can you today, if you said one thing I can do today to contribute to a culture of trust, what would that look like? What might that behavior change? How would you need to shift your perspective? And while you're thinking about that, yes, holding yourselves accountable, leading by example, being more open. Being more open, if that's the one thing that you can do, and putting aside assumptions that we make, integrity, following through, reaching out, I love that. Open and honest, being mindful. Mindfulness and being open is probably the 2 things I see most coming through in the chat box. I see authentic. So all of those, remember, trust is a verb and a noun. It's an action and it's also a result. And so there's something that you have to do, and it may not always be the other person. So let me share this kind of last concept with you on the two other types of trust that you may demonstrate in the work environment. So just like at the beginning of this, we're doing a transaction. You're here listening, I'm here teaching. Transactional trust is okay, it's necessary, it's needed. There's nothing bad with a simple transaction. Trusting is you give trust, you also receive trust. It goes both ways, and both things are happening at work. Relational trust, and so for those of you who said a circle, look at you. You were spot on, because relational trust is cyclical. It is void of finite lines, right? That can blur. You ever heard of that, like lines can blur things? And so you have more of a circle that's more open. You see that center that's open, right? So when I think of trust and relational trust, I think of that. And so when we look at relational trust, even like today, it's short term. When transactional trust, we think of short term today. You may not see me after today. It's short term. It's a one-time transaction. Here I am. Hopefully by now, after 15 minutes, it feels a little less impersonal and more personal. It can be task or project driven. Someone asks you to show up. I need you to complete this project. After the project's done, we're dismantling the project. That's transaction, but it's necessary. We get the job done. Maybe you're fueled by accomplishing your goals, right? When we think of going to the grocery store, that's a transaction, right? You go to the grocery store, you pick up groceries, you go to the checkout, and you're done. Now, if you go to the same market over and over again, and you start knowing people by name, well, you tell me, is that transactional or is that relational? In my household, I don't do the grocery shopping. My husband does the grocery shopping, and he is a Trader Joe's patron. And when he walks in that Trader Joe's, because he goes there so often, he knows people by name. In fact, they know him by name. So it's becomes less of a transaction, and it becomes more of a relationship. But both are at play at all times. Not one is better than the other, but one may be needed more in other situations at work. So you have to ask yourself in those situations and questions, how am I contributing to trust? What have I done to create a lack of trust? Is this a relationship built on transactional trust or relational trust? And when we think about how we foster a culture of trust, there's three things that I'm asking you to do. Define it, describe it, and display it. Well, what does that look like, Tiana, defining it? Define it through an unbiased perspective, void of assumptions. So when you think of trust, you should now know it is nonlinear, it is multidimensional, multifaceted. I'm going to define it in a way that removes these assumptions and a perspective that is based on bias. Well, how do I describe it? You already did that. You looked at trust and you said, it's the color of, it's a bright color, it's yellow, it's green, it's orange. It evokes a happy emotion. It evokes a warm emotion. It's a circle, right? So you've already described it. And then what does it look like in behaviors? It's being open. It's communicating. It's being authentic. So you've actually already described it. And how do I display those behaviors? Now you show up. Now I have to live that out, because now you're not only looking at the noun of trust, but the verb, which is the action. So let's see how much you've learned in the time that we've had together today to test your knowledge. So here's your first question. How much do you know? Which one is not a myth of trust? A, B, or C? Let's see. Trust is blind. Trust is unbiased. Trust is earned. Remember, there were 3 myths that I gave you. Which one was not listed in the myths that I gave you today? A, B, or C? And Emily, let's let people start to reply, and then you can give us our results.
Yes, we're going to give them a couple more seconds here. And while they do, I've got a couple of great questions in here, and I'll ask you this one first. Someone said, what if I'm in a situation where the person I am interacting with is sort of using the wrong type of trust? You know, maybe they think it's transactional and needs to be relational, or the opposite way around. How do you have that conversation of like, I don't think we're on the same page?
And who determines if that's incorrect or correct? So so if you're asking the question and they're using trust in the wrong way, I would start off with intentions, asking, you know, what's the intentions for this person? What is it that they're requesting of me? And look at a pattern of a history with this individual. Is this something that they've consistently done? Well, this may be something, and it's a consistent pattern that you want to avoid, then maybe you need to address that with them. But who's to determine that their approach in that shouldn't be transactional? Should it be relational? So you have to decide, we're coming from different places. Maybe it's transactional for me, maybe it's relational for this other person. So remember, both are at play. They're not incorrect, but you have to set some expectations and look at the intention of the individual. So I'm going to pose the question back on you. Can you go back and explore further and find out? So maybe that's a good place to start.
I love that. All right, the results are in, and coming up on top with 53% is trust is unbiased.
Yes, so everyone got that. So again, 50% got it right. Yes, so that is the one. So it actually is biased. So we talked about that. Trust is biased, right? All right, so here's another question for you. How much do you know? Which statement is true? Trust is both a noun and an adjective. Trust is both a noun and an adverb, or trust is both a noun and a verb. This is a little bit of a tricky question. So there's kind of like two correct answers here, Emily, but we'll see which one get it most. And so maybe you can ask me another question while we're doing this poll.
I got another one for you. So there were a couple of questions around this same topic area. If you're in a workplace where there's favoritism, hostile work environment, they hurt others, you know, in a place that feels, well, let's just call it what it is, toxic. How can you establish trust in a place like this, or is that an impossibility?
It's not an impossibility. It will start with changing certain things in the organization. Your leaders, those that have greater influence, you have influence, those that can really spark a change within the organization. One of the things that is lacking that I found is that people don't amplify their voice. If you see something, say something. It sounds very simple, and I know it's not. But if you see something that's toxic, you're in an earshot of someone that has said something, or maybe you were around when something was done in an environment, bringing that up, bringing light to the situation, communicating that. And I saw a lot of communication in the chat. Communicating that with someone to bring them awareness is important. Here's the other truth pill that I want to give you. Not everyone who does something wrong and breaks trust does it intentionally. It feels intentional in the moment, but it is not always intentional. People often are unaware of how they come across. They're often unaware. In fact, only about 12 to 15% of people have great awareness. The other 80 something percent, we think we're aware, but we're really not. So you have to start with intention. Are they intentionally creating a toxic work environment? Are they intentionally trying to do this to hurt me, harm me, or do me wrong? And if you say no, then go back and say, okay, let me bring awareness to this situation. And it's in how you communicate it. But I will say creating that environment does start with leadership, but it can start with you bringing it up. All right. So yes, trust is both a noun and a verb. Correct. I will also accept the 8% that said trust is both a noun and an adjective, because we did talk about trust being an adjective. But yes, correct answer is the 89%. All right. And then how much do you know? I talked about two different types of trust at the end, where I gave you a list of things. So with that, which were the two that we talked about? Kind of literally what Emily was just kind of asking me a question about too. So what are the two types of trust that we mentioned today? Type that in, and you're going to write that in. I'll give you a hint. One starts with an R, one starts with the T.
Yep, there they come in.
There you go. And both are at play. I have had an opportunity to work with local government agencies and work with their staff on various things. And we've done engagement surveys. We've worked to find out what are some of those things that create mistrust or ineffective organizations. And it does often boil down to leadership and trust, as well as communication. So I hope this planted a seed. I hope you trusted me to give you some new, better, or different information. You stayed until the end. And so what I'm going to do now is hand it back over to Emily. I know there's other questions, but I'll hang out and I'll hand it over to you, Emily.
Well, thank you so much, Tiana. I know it's always so hard to get everything in such a short period of time, but we really appreciate your insights, and you definitely gave me a whole lot to think about as well. But as you mentioned, we do have a jam-packed session. So up next to talk about how to lead with an inclusive mindset is Nathaniel Benjamin. He is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at AmeriCorps. Nate, we are so happy to have you, and I will turn the floor over to you. Oh, Nate?
Awesome. I am here. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Next slide. Who am I? I'm Nate Benjamin. I like to go by the titles that were mentioned, but first, I'm a friend, I'm a father, and I'm a husband. I go by the pronouns of he, him, and his. I am a Black man in his 40s. I have locks. I am wearing a blue blazer with a black sweater. As a part of AmeriCorps, while I serve as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, we are the federal agency for national service and volunteerism. And AmeriCorps provides opportunities for Americans of all backgrounds to serve our country, address the nation's most pressing challenges, and improve lives and communities. While I might be a senior executive, more importantly, I'm a career public servant with over 23 years of service, with most of my time leading human capital management, DEIA, and EEO and civil rights programs. I honor my lifetime's commitment to being a people's champion, diversity strategist, and executive coach. What I've realized along the way is a problem that I want to help solve, and that's ensuring that leaders have the tools to live their best and most optimal lives. But let me be clear. Every individual is a leader, as self is the agent of change. I'm so honored to be selected as one of today's lunch keynote speakers, which means that I only have a part of your attention in this session, because I am sure you're feasting on turkey pastrami sandwiches on rye or a salad with basil vinaigrette dressing. No, now seriously, I am so glad to be here before you to talk about one of my favorite conversations, which is inclusion, and more specifically, how to lead with an inclusive mindset. When I think of leading with an inclusive mindset, I'm always reminded of a leadership position that I've held for over a decade that is one of the most stressful and yet rewarding, but also pro bono, and I'm not sure if I'll ever be compensated. No, it's not serving on a board of directors or volunteering at my local nonprofit. You probably guessed it. It's called parenthood. For those who are part of a village of this next generation, whether godparents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, guardians, foster or legalized parents, there's one constant factor, and that's kids are going to be kids. When my son Andrew reached the age of 9, he proposed to me that he was ready for an allowance. He wanted to work so that he could receive an agreed upon wage so that he could spend his earned income as he deemed appropriate. You know, for me, I was elated to hear his level of responsibility and commitment to supporting household duties. For him, he heard money. He also made sure that he brought his younger sister into the conversation. Now, along with my wife, we identified the roles and responsibilities, or the duties, that were required to receive this compensation called an allowance. Examples of duties included loading and unloading the dishwasher, weekly vacuuming, taking out the trash, and cleaning their rooms. We put a system in place and ironed out the expectations. The process was bona fide. We had terms and agreements. We even shook on what we said. It was the equivalent of signing a contract. So it was clear moving forward that $15 a week times 2 kids were a part of my expenses. And do you know what happened? The first week, mission accomplished. Second week, Mission was kind of accomplished. The third week, I think they remembered the mission, but the fourth week, mission was aborted. How could this be? I don't understand. I went back to my wife and said they understood the assignment. They understood that their work was connected to money, and they keep expecting money, but they aren't meeting my expectations. And that's when my better half said, you're right. I'm right. So look, we've been married for almost 15 years and I barely hear that. So I said, where's the but? She laughed and said, they know your expectation, which is A. They know making money is B, but they don't understand that A plus B equals C. C is understanding how their work and their rewards impact the overall family unit. The family success is bigger than cleaning the house and making a monthly wage. If they just perform the task to get a check and aren't brought into the greater good, which is the family, they will always be disconnected to the why. So I had a moment. I literally sit back and said, wow, such wisdom and a needed connection. Now, I said before, I've been in the federal government for over 23 years, but as a human capital and diversity executive, I've preached this same principles for 2 decades to senior leaders, managers, and teams. But at this moment, I realize that this leadership principle for having an inclusive mindset isn't restricted to just the workforce, but this is a mobile and global concept that can and should be used in multifacets of our lives. Next slide. When I think of what true inclusion looks like and forward thinking for federal agencies, I began the conversation with one of my core principles, which is, what is my why? Harvard Business Review captures it best when they mention that diversity boosts creativity and innovation. It leads to better business decisions and results in a more professional, enriching environment. Now, you may be thinking, Nate, I thought we were talking about inclusion, but you were telling us what HBR says about diversity. But see, diversity is the underpinning of inclusion, but you will never have true inclusion unless you maintain an enriching environment. So in other words, to create and foster an enriching environment, the setting must be principled in leading a belonging-centered culture. Without belonging as a part of the organization's culture, inclusion will never exist. Dr. Laura Hamill, who is the Chief Science and People Officer for Limeade, specifies that, quote, inclusion can be measured by a sense of belonging, connection, and community at work. So another way of stating this could also be that inclusion is a part of the culture through engagement. Next slide. For background, inclusion, as defined by America's most trusted dictionary, Merriam-Webster, is the art of or practice of including and accommodating people who have been excluded as because of their race, gender, sexuality, or ability. Now let's give some grounding for this from the federal aspect. So on June 25th, 2021, President Biden signed an executive order, which was 14035. And the goal of that was to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce. This EO reaffirms that the United States is at its strongest when our nation's public servants reflect the diversity of the American people. And when public servants reflect communities they serve, the government is more effective and successful. And so, staying in line with definitions, the executive order defines inclusion as the recognition, the appreciation, and the use of the talents and skills of employees of all backgrounds. Next slide. So now that we have a grounding in diversity and inclusion, let's jump into 3 ways to lead with an inclusive mindset and what many forward-thinking agencies are attributing to organizational success. First, we must embed DEIA transformation into our business practices, our policies, and our procedures. Progressive organizations recognize for this inclusion work to remain a part of its arsenal, the work must be directly connected and embedded into the agency's mission. Gartner's research frames its strategic planning hypothesis that by 2026, 50% of organizations that do not have inclusive work environments will fall behind, slowing down innovation, productivity, and financial performance. And so while the federal government isn't generally an entity for producing revenue, we are the United States' #1 employer, and falling behind in innovation and productivity for our missions is simply not an option. Next, we must increase equity opportunities for internal staff and external stakeholders. Forward-leaning agencies have put measures in place to identify that equity is simply the fair treatment and equality of access to opportunity, information, and resources for all. And then lastly, we must develop an inclusive organizational culture. Inclusive organizational culture creates sustainability, decrease attrition and turnover, increase retention, maintains knowledge management, and outperforms non-inclusive organizations. So I want to also go to Glassdoor. They had a 2020 diversity and inclusion workforce survey. And some of the stats that mentioned were very telling as to why this work is important. 76% of employees and job seekers reported that diversity was important when considering job offers. 89% of people want their company to be inclusive of individuals with intellectual disabilities. Racially and ethnically diverse companies have a 36% higher likelihood of financially outperforming less diverse companies. And then lastly, organizations with a high level of engagement do report 22% higher productivity. So as you're hearing through the themes, you're seeing that there's a connection between the engagement, the inclusion, and the overall business outcomes, which are captured through productivity. So let me simplify this a little bit. I want you to remember these simple fundamental truths as we delve even deeper into these 3 guiding principles. Let's do this more simplistically. 3 ways to lead with an inclusive mindset are focusing on business, access, and culture. Now, I thought that DEIA was about the hearts and mind work. That could be considered one motivator. But I want to bring you back to the story of my son, wanting to earn an allowance, but ultimately falling within a month. See, what I had to later realize was that he was committed to the task, but we both missed the integral aspect of connecting him to the greater responsibility, which was how does this work support or advance the family unit? You see, he was 9 at the time, but this was a testament of how often leaders can forget that when teams aren't connected to the mission and how their work aligns to it, commitment is also lost. Author and chief scientist for workplace management and well-being at Gallup, Dr. Jim Harter says, engaged employees are more attentive and vigilant. They look out for the needs of their coworkers and the overall enterprise. And because they personally own the result of their work and that of the organization. So inclusion cannot be exclusive to hearts and mind work. It must be built into the fabric of an organization's strategy. And now I will share with you a brief snapshot of how this can be done. Next slide. So remember, there's 3 things that we discussed: business, access, and culture. So from business, you should see on the screen that there's a DEIA transformation slide. Federal agencies were charged by the Office of Personnel Management, otherwise known as OPM, to develop and implement strategic DEIA plans for their workforces. At AmeriCorps, I had the pleasure of being a part of an agency that recognized the importance of integration and supported not only the development of the DEIA strategy, but ensuring that DEIA was embedded at the agency level by including it in its people scope. This allowed the agency's strategy to set the direction of people, which is shared between DEIA, HR, which allows both offices to cascade our work from the agency's strat plan to our respective blueprints. To ensure integration, we aligned that our outcomes back up to what we discussed earlier, which was organizational success. and ensured that we had the fiscal budgeting to support the bottom line. Next, we engaged with all stakeholders immediately and communicated and marketed DEIA to the workforce. Now, those steps were paramount to supporting DEIA transformation because it was embedded into the way our organization does business. And so oftentimes we think of how do we operationalize the work, but what we have to realize is that the strategic planning comes first. It's the foundational work required for operational work to be then embedded into your business, which undergirds how to lead and gain effective business outcomes. Next slide, please. Access. Forward-leaning agencies are being intentional in organizational introspection, which is taking a deeper dive or a further look in its current practices to ensure that barriers aren't in place that disenfranchises communities. Ways to inspect your current processes lean into areas such as how equitable is your performance management and award system? Does the data demonstrate that demographics are overly compensated or undercompensated as opposed to your overall population? If so, why? Are hiring practices and recruitment strategies intentional in targeting more diverse pipelines? Do our recruitment strategies align to reflect the talent pool? And does that talent pool demonstrate consistency in hiring decisions? Do employees have access to the same training opportunities, mentoring programs? Who's being sponsored in the rooms that others aren't normally a part of? You see, these are all areas that we continually work through to ensure that equity is afforded, not just to those internal, but also the American people that receive the benefit of the federal government, whether it's nonprofits applying for federally appropriated grant dollars, ways that we support tribal communities and Native nations. See, this equity work is bigger than just the organization. And introspection supports a nation of people that need us to think about how most appropriately we consider equitable solutions. Next slide. And then inclusive cultures. Forward-leaning organizations and examples for leading with inclusion is demonstrated by organizations' commitments. Some organizations have been pioneers and developed national engagement strategies rooted in the ability to create and foster inclusive organizations. I'm proud to say that one of AmeriCorps' best practices is the establishment of what we coined as community spaces, which is an employee-led psychological safe space for the workforce grappling with challenges and the impact and how it shows up in the workplace. Forward-leaning organizations also have established diversity advisory groups, affinity, employee resource, or business groups. And these are best practices to create commonalities within communities for subordinated groups or the allies that they support. Use of affirming language, where micro-affirmations are used instead of microaggressions, is necessary in communication lexicon, as language is one part of managing inclusive communities. Ensuring transparency supports how we build trust. Just as Tiana Sanchez just mentioned, while building relationships is required and necessary. Back to that word, organizational introspection. It's not only seeing who is at this decision-making table, but also engaging with the diversity of thought in a positive and constructive way. Federal agencies are fostering and adopting in terms of being forward-leaning. Next slide. I'll go just very quickly through the table. And this is the seat at the table versus the voice at the table. And so the seat at the table is when we think about who has a seat at the table, generally speaking, those that have the seat at the table get to make either the decisions or influence the decisions. And so when we're talking about inclusion, it is pivotal for organizations to consider who has a seat at the table. But then when you are afforded the seat at the table, it's okay to use your voice because any influence comes from anywhere, but making sure that that voice or that person sitting there, it's transformative and not considered performative in nature. And so when you see organizations that are very excited about their diversity efforts, and they have the first person that's ever been in this role that comes from this demographic. We can't just tout that information without allowing that person to have the same flexibilities and the same support as others that have continually sat at those tables. Next slide. I'm going to go through to the next slide so we can go ahead and also have opportunity for a Q&A. So one of the ways that the federal government continually assesses the DEIA within the organization and challenges us as leaders to help promote and support inclusive organizations is the development in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey of what's known as the DEIA Index. And the DEIA Index is a way to measure the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility efforts that are being performed at your federal agencies that take the survey. And so this is a way that we are using data-informed metrics to help identify strategies to further support and promote the inclusion work that we're doing at an organizational level. And we also want to align it back to the executive order, which deals with the 4-letter acronym that's a part of DEIA. And that's the same way that the index captures the information. And these results serve as a baseline, and it supports how we assess future changes as well as benchmark comparisons across federal agencies in terms of DEIA initiatives. So in closing, this work is pivotal for the way that we, as the 2.1 million in the federal workforce, achieves the outcomes that are necessary for our missions. I know that we also have individuals that are part of local, state, and national governments, local and state governments, and you are a part of this too. The more inclusive your organizations are, the more you are the agent of change, and the more that you're using your seat to promote this work, the better it will be for our missions and our organizational outcomes. And you can hit the last slide. Why not? So questions and learn about AmeriCorps, learn about me. I think we got time for a couple of questions. So Emily, over to you.
We do. And of course, we want to learn more about you and AmeriCorps. So I'm guessing you'll get just a few LinkedIn requests here in the next couple of minutes. All right, a couple of quick questions for you here, Nate. And one of them is really around this idea of the management structure and where, folks who may not have authority over the agency or the department, how can they play a role in this space? If you can't set policy, can you do anything to help with inclusion?
Yes. And the reason being is because inclusion work doesn't start with just management. Like, this is all of our responsibility. And so I want to just give an example of a project that we're working on at our organization. We're doing this high school tour. We're going to several high schools within the DC metropolitan area to promote the work that we do for our outside programs. Those great ideas didn't come from me. It didn't come from our CEO. It didn't come from a senior executive. It came from a GS7 that was in an office who said, I think this is important. We should do it. And it was them using their voice to just elevate their own voice, to see a need, to identify it, and to say, and how can I support with that? So one of our major initiatives that we're doing in fiscal year 24 is attributed back to an employee who saw a need. So often we have the mindset where we're supposed to sit back and wait for leaders to come up with the ideas. Well, I want to be clear. Oftentimes we're not sitting back formulating the ideas. We are here leading work, but some of the greatest and best ideas come from the people who are on the ground because they are most passionately connected to the work that is being performed. So to greater pull that together, I would say we should always be, as I mentioned before, self as the agent of change. We should be starting those conversations. We should be bringing them to our team leaders, to our supervisors, to our directors, to our managers. That's a part of your conversation. It's a part of your professional development, and it's a way that you show your support and connection to the organization.
All right, two more quick questions. And the first is, a lot of our attendees today have heard DEI talked about quite a lot, but not that A piece. Talk to me a little bit more about sort of how accessibility came into the fold and where it plays a role.
Yes. So, back in the day, it used to be just called D and I, right? So, we're seeing the E added, the A, in other places you see the B and the J in different letters. But the accessibility portion was definitely added in this administration. And accessibility is thinking and ensuring that there is fair and equitable access for those that are from the able community. And so, when you think about things as far as reasonable accommodations, when you consider 508 compliance to make sure that those that might have visual impairments or different divergent challenges have the same access to be able to freely perform the work and to enjoy the same luxuries that others might have that do not necessarily have some of the disabilities. So that is a diverse community, and we want to ensure that they are not forgotten about. They are part of the conversation equally as any others.
I love it. All right, final question, and this is the most hard hitting. Did your kids recommit to their contracts?
No, they didn't. And I'm saving $60 a month. And until they do it, that's when they'll get paid. So no, they have not.
I love it. Well, maybe they need to recommit, but that $60 savings is good. Thank you so much, Nate. I really appreciate it. You gave me a whole lot to think about, and I know our audience did as well. But before everybody logs off today, we have some exciting announcements to share. And first and foremost, we are going to unveil our 2023 NextGen Public Service Award winners. So drum roll, please, because in the category of advancing tech, we have Eli Holmes, who is a research fish biologist for the National Marine Fisheries Services at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We also have Michael Burkholt, who is the Manager of Business Relations for the Federal Acquisition Service in the Office of Information Technology category for the U.S. General Service Administration. So let's give them a round of applause in the chat. Some snaps, some emojis. Let's show them some love. In the category of Manager of the Year, we've got Tamara Wellesley, who is the Associate Director in the Office of Publishing for the Congressional Research Service at the Library of Congress. And we also have Eric Clark, who is the Business Relations Unit Manager for the Colorado Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. So snaps to both of them. Let's give them a little bit of love, of course. In the category of DEIA Champion, we have Ethan Fletcher Leggett, who is the lead research epidemiologist at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health for the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And we also have Carolyn Goon, who is the Director of External Affairs for the White House's Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. A round of applause to both of those worthy winners there. In our next category, we have the Communicator of the Year, a topic we have been talking about a lot today. And winning in this category, we have Jennifer Parisian, who is a policy advisor with the Office of Tribal and Native Affairs at the U.S. Department of Treasury. And we also have Justin Barnes, who's a department analyst, I can talk today, at the Calaveras County Public Health Department. Congratulations to both of you, and we're going to give you some snaps in the chat as well. And in our next category, our Innovator of the Year category, we have Wendy Bowerman, who is a Quality Assurance Specialist for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and Pakar Bagaji, who is a Senior Data Scientist in the Office of Innovation for the City of Austin in Texas. Congratulations to both of you. And last, but certainly not least, in our category, Outstanding Colleague, and isn't this something that all of us want to aspire to be? We have Mikkel Osterland, who's a Prevention Specialist for the Utah County Health Department. We also have Marissa Pedro, who's a Program Analyst for the Business Process Management Program at the U.S. Census Bureau. These 12 amazing award winners have done some truly incredible work, and I very much encourage you, it's in the Resource Center right now, to take a look at the profiles of some of the work that they have done. These individuals have all been nominated from their colleagues, or by their colleagues, I should say, and we are very fortunate to have them working in the government space. And if you don't believe me, we have pulled together a short little video of them sharing in their own words what public service means to them.
I am in public service because the kind of work that I do, I am able to help the most vulnerable population for the city. I want to make sure that whatever skill set and whatever technologies we are using here at City of Austin, it helps the people who need it the most.
When I was very young, I dedicated my life to God. And at that point, I wanted to serve Him. And I do believe that the public service that I'm doing is in the whole pathway, and my journey is in service to God and people, and this plays a part of it. Yeah, that about sums it up.
I'm in public service because I sort of alluded to this earlier, but I mean, I wholeheartedly prescribe to the biblical tenet that to whom much is given, much will be required. In my work in supporting Congress, and I must say in a nonpartisan role, I am, as I noted earlier, in effect supporting the American people. I truly consider that a huge honor and a huge privilege. But I also take very seriously my role as a manager and a leader, where I celebrate, I appreciate, and I advocate for those who I have been entrusted to lead.
I'm in public service because I think public service provides an opportunity to work with people towards real, sustained change in their life. I think that is what government and public service is here to do, is to help people. I also think public service, for me, it's the best opportunity to leave a lasting impression in my community and to help pave a positive path for my kids when they're older. And so I always think about when I'm working with a person or I'm working with a business, eventually that person or business might supervise my kids. They might hire my kids. They might have a service that my kids can benefit from, or my family member or my friends could benefit from.
I'm in public service because I feel a certain sense of pride in serving my community, whether that be a very specific community like transgender folks within the LGBTQ+ community, or very broad as in the United States. And so working at the federal level in public health allows me to be a public servant and working towards health equity for all people in the United States.
I am in public service because at the core of the work surrounding diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, it's about people and it's about human lives. I am in public service because I feel the urgency and I'm committed to prioritizing humanity, the healing of what's been broken, and community building. We wake up each morning and the call doesn't stop. The calls to action, to building relationships, to ideas, to future possibilities. Let's welcome it, embrace it, and pursue it on our journey to transformation.
I am in public service because I have always really been drawn to altruistic activities. If I look back on my life, I always wanted to be the person who's out there helping with things, creating things, and I just have a lot of satisfaction when I'm in that role. So I think I would have always been drawn to some kind of service, and in public service, I feel like I make a big difference.
I'm in public service because I think it can work better and I think I can help.
I grew up on my reservation, as I said, the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewas. I'm a mom of 2 daughters. I think I'm in public service because I want to make a difference, and I know that some of the things I'm working on, policies, they will make a difference by the time my daughters are grown up and my granddaughters are grown up and my great-great-granddaughters are grown up.
I'm in public service because I want to improve society with no other ask other than that. I want to make society better just for the betterment of society itself, improving things because they can be improved and they should be. And the reality is that government and public service is just made up of a bunch of regular people that are all part of the society they serve, and we want to see things better.
I'm in public service because I believe that by empowering individuals, we empower our communities and we make our communities better. That's why I'm in public service.
I am in public service because, quite literally and honestly, luck. I had no intention of entering public service after college. So I think actually the better question for me is, why did I stay in public service? And that's easy. It was the people. Personally, I have met some of my closest friends because I work at the Census Bureau. Professionally, I have learned a lot from the many managers that I have had throughout my almost 19 years at Census. And finally, regardless of what a certain segment of our population may believe, government is a necessary institution that does serve the people. So I'm doing my part to make sure my agency is providing the right service to all of the people.
Well, thank you all so much. This session went a few minutes over, so we totally understand you all need to run to the restroom or grab some food because the next session starts in just 5 minutes. You can pick from one of these great sessions, and we'll see you over there soon. Bye.